Hey, it's Patrick from JP Cycles, and today we're going to show you how to put this Rinehart 2-in-1 system on a Milwaukee 8 powered Softail. The bike behind me is of course a Fat Bob, but this installation is going to be very similar for all Milwaukee 8 powered Softails. Let's get to work. This front Allen up here may be a little more difficult. You might have to use a ball Allen to get in there and break it loose. A nice little trick, you can stick this in there, just take a crescent wrench, put it down on there, and that's gonna give us some leverage to break those Allen bolts loose. Might have to give these a little wiggle. Okay, before we take the header off, we need to unplug our O2 sensors, which we are going to reuse. The rear one is plugged in right here behind the first bend here, and the front one is plugged in right here by the voltage regulator. Okay, now that we have the header off, we need to scavenge a few pieces off of it. We're gonna take out our O2 sensors and we're gonna reuse them in our new exhaust. We're also going to use our exhaust flanges and the clips holding them on. If you have a pair of snap ring pliers, you can get those off. Otherwise, a good old-fashioned flat-bladed screwdriver, trying to stab yourself in the hand. So we're gonna use a 14mm wrench and just pull these O2 sensors out. Okay, so now we're gonna take a 5/16 Allen and take our exhaust mounting bracket off there. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to start prepping our new header with all the pieces we scavenged off of our old exhaust. We're gonna take our flanges, put them on here with our snap rings, and we're gonna reuse our old O2 sensors. But as you can see, the thread is for an 18mm. They send these little adapters that if you're reusing your stock narrow bands, put these in there. If you're gonna use a wide band, you're just gonna go right back in there with what they have. Now, a lot of people use anti-seize on the threads of the O2 sensor and on the adapter. I'm actually not a huge anti-seize guy, so I'm not gonna use that. And we are gonna reuse our stockers. So I'm gonna thread these adapters in there. I'm gonna thread the O2 sensor in there, and go ahead and put our flanges on and get this thing ready to put on the bike. So for the adapter, you're gonna need a 7/8 wrench or socket. And for the O2 sensor itself, we're actually gonna use a 14mm wrench. You put these flanges on, this little beveled edge, this little cutout edge here goes up, because that's what's your snap ring is going to end up sitting down in there. So you put the flat side down, put the little cutout side up. I just don't like to put all this stuff on here and have an exhaust leak, so we're gonna swap our exhaust gaskets out for a set of fresh ones. So now that we have our exhaust gaskets in, we're gonna go ahead and put on our bracket back here. And depending on what model you have, that may influence your spacer. So if you have a wide tire model, you're actually gonna use a different spacer than this. But for our standard model, we're gonna use this 3/4 inch spacer behind the bracket. And you can see the bracket is stepped down there for these low profile bolts, which is actually a 3/16 Allen. And it'll go in there like that. Now I'm gonna use thread locker on these, a blue thread locker, and I'm gonna torque them to 30 foot-pounds. So now we're gonna put our header on. I like to put the back head on first and kind of work the front pipe around. And we're gonna reuse our stock flange nuts that we took off. And we're just gonna finger tight these right now. We're not gonna tighten them up, run them down with your fingers and snug them up. And then we're gonna move back to putting our muffler on. But before we do that, I like to plug in my O2 sensors right now after I get the header on, even though it's just finger tight. That way I don't forget later. So now that we have those finger tight, we're gonna plug in our O2 sensors, and then we're gonna move back to the muffler. So before we put our muffler on, we're gonna slide our muffler clamp over the top. We wanna make sure that nut is facing down. Facing down when you're on the bike, you want the nut facing down. The next thing we're gonna need to do is take these 5/16 bolts and slide them in the slot. There's a cutout right here. You can slide these in this slot just like this. And then we put the muffler on, those bolts will drop through the bracket, and we'll take these nylock nuts and put them on finger tight on the back of the bracket. So now everything's finger tight, and we're gonna go tighten this all up with our torque wrench. Now, these flange nuts up here do have a torque spec 8 to 10 foot-pounds. We're gonna do those first. A lot of times I don't use a torque wrench on these just because I have a pretty good feel with it. If you don't have a good feel, definitely use your torque wrench. It's just a little bit tough getting that thing to torque with that mushy gasket. And then we're gonna go back here to these bolts where the muffler are. We're gonna torque them to 13 to 15 foot-pounds. Then lastly, we're gonna spin this up as far as we can out of the way. We're gonna torque that to 40 to 45 foot-pounds. Okay, so we're coming down the home stretch and it's time to put the heat shields on. We're gonna start with the rear header, and when you lace the clamps through there, this top one, we wanna have it pointing back this way, have the nut pointing back that way, and then on the second one, we want the nut pointing down. That'll make them easier to get to once they're on the bike. Now, there is a third one on here, but it actually comes in contact with the transmission trap door right here. You can't flip it over because of how the pipe is down here. We actually contacted the guys at Rinehart and they instructed us just to leave that one off. So this back one's only gonna get 2. And when you feed these through here, I like to take and put a little bend in them with a pair of needle nose. That'll help them kind of come together when you're trying to tighten them up on the bike. We'll put this one on, don't tighten it up all the way, just kind of snug it up. Then we'll put the front one on in our collector. We'll go back at the end and tighten them all up. Okay, so now we're ready for the front heat shield. We have 3 clamps on here. This top one, we're gonna face towards the back of the bike, and then these other 2, we're gonna have the nuts facing down so we can access them. Same thing, we're gonna slip the clamps through there, put a little bend on them, put this on and just snug it up, not tighten it just yet. So now we're gonna put the collector heat shield on. We're gonna make sure this nut is facing down, and then I'm gonna tighten this one up all the way, and go back and tighten the other 2 exhaust shields up. The reason I'm waiting is I just wanna make sure I have a good fit here, tighten this up, and then I'll tighten the other 2 shields up. Okay, our heat shields are all tightened up, but before we start this, we wanna make sure we go back and wipe all of our fingerprints off this. If not, when you start this up, it's gonna get hot and it's gonna burn those fingerprints into your nice chrome. Then we'll fire it up, see what she sounds like. Just like that, an immediate improvement in sound and horsepower. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop us a comment. Go work on those motorcycles.